Hello there, everybody. I just want to take a little of your time to tell you about how I have used the iPads in the chemistry classroom this year. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gary Thayer, and I teach chemistry and AP chemistry at Oak Harbor High School. One of the first things I noticed when the 14 iPads showed up in my classroom this year was just how engaged the students were. When they had an assignment, when they had a task that required them to use the iPads, the room just became magically quiet, and they were all so engaged in what they were doing. Now, that doesn't mean there haven't been a few bumps along the road in learning how to use the iPads. iPads were intended to be used by individuals, and so sharing them in the classroom among 10 students is a little tricky, and it takes courtesy and cooperation and some planning and some experimentation. Those are things you have to be willing to do, and your students have to be willing to do to make the iPads work with multiple users in the classroom. Another thing that is helpful along these lines, I think, was the iPad user agreement, so that the students knew there were expectations and responsibilities involved in using the iPad. And I think that's going to be especially important next year, starting out with the students at the beginning of the year, so they don't just anticipate that this is an expectation that they have these devices, but that it is a privilege. We tried to find as many things as we possibly could to utilize the iPads in the classroom. Sometimes it was taking pictures of lab equipment and lab procedures so students could understand how to perform certain labs. Sometimes it was taking pictures to collect data so that we could either share that data with each other or share it with people who were not present. Sometimes it was to help us remember how we were setting up the lab or some other detail about how the process worked. One of the most regular daily uses of the iPad was so students could access our chemistry website. That way they could have what they needed when they needed it. And that's an important part of providing individualized instruction for students in the classroom. At that website, they can find worksheets and keys to worksheets and videos that show them how to solve problems and other resources that will help them with their experience in chemistry. Another one of the activities that utilizes the strengths of the iPad that we are really excited about is using the QR codes to introduce projects or to place around the room at stations so students can access what they need, when they need, and the QR code takes them right to it, whether it's a website or a Google form with a questionnaire for them to fill out, an assignment that's online, whatever it is. The QR code way of getting the students to the right place has been very effective. The iPads also became a gateway so that students who discovered really cool things in their science classroom on the iPad just kind of picked up their phone and started connecting to the same thing on their phone. And so it became a gateway so that students explored with their own devices. And I didn't set this picture up. I actually took this picture of a student going, Science 360? I want to know how to get a hold of that so that I can watch it when I want to watch it, at home or when I'm driving down the road or whatever I'm doing. Sometimes it was a matter of just the students finding whatever resources they needed to take care of whatever problem it was that they were working on. In this case, the students are watching Steve Spangler, one of the best science demonstrators around these days, on the Ellen DeGeneres show, looking at some really cool chemistry. there was one idea I really wanted to focus with on my action research, and that was the idea that is proposed by researchers at Stanford and Vanderbilt University. And they have a group who propose that students work harder, reason better, and ultimately they understand more by learning to teach someone else. This is called the protege effect, and that's what I explored this year in my action research. I wanted students to be able to develop storyboards and then produce videos on the iPads explaining the concepts that they were learning in chemistry and then sharing those videos with other students. We started by listening to a presentation on how to be an explainer, and students started by developing some videos. But in these first videos, a lot of what they were doing was learning how to use the iPad and what apps work and how to share those with each other. And so they started out learning how to be explainers. And in the process, they were learning chemistry. But I have to say that right up front, they spent a lot of time, instead of just learning chemistry, a lot of our time was spent learning to run the iPads and learning how to manage them. And so there are a lot of things that we will be able to pass on to those who follow behind us to teach them and their students the most efficient way and the best apps and some of those kinds of things. And now comes the story of Unit 6. Unit 6 is where we really started to have control enough over the iPads and an understanding of how to use the iPads so that students could really start making their own explanations. So here you see a couple of students working on a problem that they're solving. Now the problem happens to be on one of the worksheets that we normally work for Unit 6. Now you have to understand something about Unit 6. Unit 6 takes many of the things we've been working on for the entire year. Naming compounds, balancing chemical equations, working stoichiometry problems, calculating percent yield, calculating theoretical yield. A lot of things go into Unit 6. And this year, the students were the explainers and the learners. They watched each other's videos, and that enabled them to work their way through each one of the problems on the worksheet. Unit 6 is always a little bit frightening for us as teachers, because this is what we typically see. Last year, if you look at the test scores from Unit 5 to Unit 6, an 11% drop in scores because of the complexity and rigor of Unit 6. So how might that change in a world where the students were the explainers? Now, the only thing that I can think of that's different in 2013 from 2012 are the students and the iPads. In 2012, the same test was given as in 2013. But in 2013, the average score on Unit 5 was 82%, and instead of making an 11-point drop in 2013, there was a 4% increase from Unit 5 to Unit 6. So I have to tell you, I am more than just a little excited about trying to continue with this same model in coming years. So what are my plans for the future and the iPads and the technology in my classroom or in anybody else who's willing to work with this program? Well, that should be obvious at this point. I plan on working with more curriculum that is current, individualized, and differentiated. And the iPads really help with that. Now, some of that means becoming more proficient and understanding how to use Google Drive and Google Forms to effectively do sharing between students and teachers, to be more effective at doing formative assessment using things like forms, or using Socrative to do formative assessment with my students to understand exactly what they're understanding and to teach them to use it possibly with each other. But most of all, I'm excited about teaching students to be explainers. Because, as you all know, when we are effective explainers, we are also super effective learners. Hey, thanks everybody. Any questions? You know where to get a hold of me.